David Poile is back. John Hynes is back. And Preds fans discourse is back. We'll talk about the Preds bringing back their head coach for a 2-year extension. The press conference yesterday that followed it, a lot of interesting tidbits came into that. And did David Poile drop a few big hints about the direction he wants to take the Preds this summer? We'll break it all down today on the Locked On Predators podcast.
You're Locked On Predators, your daily podcast on the Nashville Predators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making Locked On Predators your first listen of the day. I'm Nick Morgan. I'm a writer and editor at ontheforecheck.com, and I have a partner in crime who it's good to see after a week out of the country.
I know. I've been humming that Peaches and Herbs song, Reunited, because I'm so happy you're back. I'm Ann Kimmel. I'm a writer at ontheforecheck.com. It's so good to have you back. Was it amazing?
It was amazing. Dominican is awesome for anybody listening out there. Highly recommend Excellence El Carmen for anybody who is looking for a nice little getaway. Or if you have a friend that happens to be getting married there, even
all
better.
the better.
All the better. And it was interesting because I didn't have like great cell or internet service there. So I apparently missed a lot of hockey stuff. Over the past week or so. Yaroslav Askarov coming here with an entry-level contract.
Yes.
Milwaukee Admirals advancing to the next round. Couple of exciting stuff. I'm still getting caught up on all the shows he did with Eric and our prospects and Brian with kind of his stat breakdown of the year.
Yeah.
So some good shows there. But of course, I got back in time to hear the big stuff yesterday.
Ooh, thank goodness you got back for this. This was a whole thing. So yesterday, David Poile and John Hynes had their end of the season press conference, and there had been some kind of rumblings on Twitter because normally it's done very close to the end of the season, kind of right after locker cleanout, and it wasn't. And so I think people's imagination went to, oh, maybe John Hynes isn't coming back. And I'm like, y'all, just sit down, just sit tight. And turned out John Hynes is coming back, and he's coming back for a 2-year extension. So how are we feeling about this, Nick?
For John Hynes, I would say fair call. That was, I think, kind of what we all expected. I think the only thing that we thought that Hynes wouldn't be back is if Poile wasn't back.
Right.
And that's a part of the discussion we'll get to in a little bit. But, you can't judge somebody based on either their highest or their lowest moments. I think you kind of have to look at their full body of work. And I think when you look at John Hynes' full body of work, and we talked about this, he has certainly had a good few years as Predators head man in charge. He obviously, and we talked about this before, deserves his fair share of criticism for the Preds play down the stretch this year, as well as their performance in the first round. But I do like what he has been able to do with this team. We talk about it all the time that it's become sort of a broken record, but the Preds' identity, they're back to kind of having a clear vision of how they want to play. And I think that is something that maybe, sort of towards the end of the Peter Laviolette era, the Preds didn't really necessarily have. You kind of saw, them kind of stuck between the old school Preds era and, the up and coming, we want, our, a big high scoring team, exciting, flashy and everything like that. And I think John Hynes has kind of come in and been like, you know what, this is how we're going to do things. This is the vision we have for how this team is going to play. So from that end, I think he has done a good job of the Nashville Predators, and he has definitely earned that, that 2-year extension. Definitely going to be under the microscope, though.
For sure.
I think fans are going to be wanting to see more consistency from them next year, especially, down the stretch.
I would agree with that. I am very glad that Hynes was brought back. when the news sort of leaked the night before, it was mentioned that he had a multi-year deal. And I will say that I was a little concerned about that. Now, it is a multi-year deal. It's 2 years. But my fear was, if you're looking at a 4 or 5 year deal for Hynes, I love Hynes back. 2 years is perfect. But if you look at anything longer than that, I think you miss a window for Carl Taylor. And, somebody else would snatch him up in 4 to 5 years. And so I love the 2 year deal. I agree with you. Hynes it's going to be a very important 2 years. He is going to be under the microscope. This team has got to keep progressing, but it's the right move. And for people who are frustrated by this, it is the right move. Good players have gotten better. The locker room is healthy. If you hear from any of the players, from leaders down to veterans, they talk about the chemistry in this team. And that's a credit to John Hynes. You're seeing improvements on special teams. So this is all moving in the right trajectory. And I like that Hynes still can lead this ship a little while longer. The whole Barry Trotz, Trotsky. I mean, that's like going back to your ex-boyfriend.
That's yeah. And
that's he was not good for you. He was not good for you.
Well, he was, but it's very different situation. And I think coaching things, especially in pro sports, with very few exceptions, I think kind of have a timeline. Like Barry Trotz was an amazing coach for the Predators their first decade and a half of existence. And then it just became clear. It's like, you know what, this isn't, the right direction. And then look what happened for Washington. He was able to come in and turn that team around. And I think, right now, Trotz is probably someplace that is going to be kind of closer to winning.
Yes.
I would say that. And that seems to kind of be what David Poile hinted at yesterday, because he was asked that question. It's like, would there be any thought of bringing in Trotz for a front office role? And Poile just straight up said, it sounds like, Barry still wants to coach a little bit. So, he's probably going to be wanting to get someplace for the cup. But that's the same thing that happened with Peter Laviolette too. After Trotz, Peter Laviolette, fantastic coach. I mean, helped the Predators kind of unlock a different dimension. But then it became clear that just didn't work anymore. So now it's, how long is John Hynes going to work? Is this identity that they built sustainable to luring, big name players to come here and play, or, if not big name players, at least, significant free agents, additions, that sort of thing. And B, is it going to help you win games in the postseason, which has kind of been the big thing that the Preds have been trying to figure out the past couple of years. So yeah, from that end, I think 2 years is definitely sort of, the right window.
Yes, I think it's plenty of leash for Hynes to continue to move this team in the right direction. And I really believe that is what he is capable of doing and what he is going to do. This is what Poile had to say about Hynes coming back. I thought this was interesting.
John deserves this. We're growing together. I'm responsible. I haven't given him enough to be winning. We're going to win in the playoffs this year against Colorado. Or should we play somebody else? That's our fault. That's on our list to try to move up higher in the standings so we don't have to play the best team next year. But I think he's done a fantastic job in his staff. And the results are right in front of all of us in terms of how we played, how hard we played, how all the individuals played. So I am totally comfortable with John and our coaching staff to lead us to bigger and better things going forward.
And he kind of expanded on that also. I think this was sort of later in the press conference when he was talking about how he was doing player interviews with all the players at the end of the season. He said, just unsolicited, the first thing that a lot of these players mentioned was how much they love the leadership. And that includes both Hynes and some of the veteran players. So the vibe is there. And I do think the resume that Hynes put in this season kind of reflects what David Poile was talking about. It's like he has earned this.
Yes. People are so frustrated about the first round exit, and rightly so. It was frustrating. But I think you have to remember that only one team wins the Stanley Cup. only one team wins the Stanley Cup. And the Predators need to move closer to that. They have got to be able to get through the first round. They have got to be able to compete better at the end of the season. But the idea that John Hynes isn't the right coach because he can't get this team or didn't get this team to a Stanley Cup is just ridiculous logic, because otherwise you would have 31 coaches fired every season. So it's the right direction. I think he has come in and brought health into the locker room, which is one of the biggest challenges. Once you get that, you can then deal with the tactical issues, but you've got to get everybody working together. You've got to get team chemistry going. And so I think the next 2 years of Hynes' tenure in Nashville, there will be exponential improvements, because that foundation, that really hard work has had to happen early for him.
And I think it's going to be interesting to see what he does with this team next year. And it kind of goes in to our next part of the discussion, which is David Poile. Unless there was something they completely sort of hid yesterday, it sounds like David Poile is also going to be the man in charge next year. What do we think of that part? And do you think there was any serious consideration that David Poile was not going to be back next year? That's an interesting topic. But first, though, want to mention today's show brought to you by our friends at Built Bar. They have a new thing out called Built Bar Brownie Batter Puffs. Yeah, I love brownies, but you know what I love more? Brownie batter. I mean, come on. And you're a mom. How many times are you making brownies in the kitchen that you just threw the entire bowl to your kids and was like, here, take a spatula, go to town?
That's right. Lick the beaters while they're off.
Well, so Built Bar is putting the best of that together. They have a new creation. This one is better than ever. The Brownie Batter Puffs. It is basically the Built Bar Puffs, which is the protein-infused marshmallow. They are covered in 100% real chocolate, but they are brownie batter flavored. Yep, it is brownie on top of brownie on top of brownie. But hey, this isn't just, a sweet treat. They are good for you. Built Bars are low in calories, high in protein, and only 7 grams of sugar. Plus, they're made with collagen protein, which your body absorbs more efficiently and provides tons of other health benefits. So these keep you full longer. Trust me, when you're eating this, you are going to 100% feel like you're going to have to add more, calorie points to your budget. But no, this is a healthy treat that will keep you full all day long. So go to built.com and test out the Brownie Batter Puffs today. While you're there, use promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your order. Again, that is promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. So John Hynes coming back. We both agree definitely should have happened. The other end of the spectrum, David Poile. It seems like he's going to be remaining in charge up until next season, or at least through next season at the very least. That I think is the one that maybe rubs some of Preds Nation the wrong way a little bit.
Yes, and I can sort of see it, but I was reassured after this press conference, because one of my big concerns with Poile is he out of touch with where this team is and where they need to get to? And he acknowledges the issues that this team has. He's very upfront about, I didn't give Hynes what he needed to win. I didn't make a move at the trade deadline and drop lots of money on rentals because we weren't a Stanley Cup team. We have holes in our lineup. We had an issue with backup goaltending, so he acknowledges the things that I think everybody sees as glaring roadblocks to this team getting further in the playoffs. I'm torn on this one. I can see it. It's reassuring that Poile sort of is reading some of the things with the team right. I also think every team is very static. Every season is static. Coaches are static. And if you look over the Predators' tenure, there's highs and lows, valleys and peaks, but the consistent thing is David Poile. And I think you have to keep in the back of your mind, the Predators have not won a Stanley Cup. They've gotten close. They've been competitive at times. But I think the leash is getting shorter. Now, he was completely affirmed by Sean Henry and the leadership team. He has their 100% support. They are 100% on board with the direction that he wants to take this team. And he was very clear about that. And Sean Henry posted a letter to Smashville.
A good old Dear Fans letter. That's always
Dear
something
fans.
that
Yeah. So I think that he has that support, but I do wonder if internally the leash is getting shorter and shorter. I know with the fans, the leash is real short, but
well,
I don't know.
Well, and here's the thing, Anne. As we've learned sort of in hockey media, usually when there's smoke, there's some sort of fire. We kind of heard it, I flash back to like January 2019, when there's like some just chatter, and it's like, oh yeah, Kyle Turris might be a guy that gets traded by the Predators sooner. They may try to look for trade. It's like, what? Didn't we just get him? Didn't we just sign him to a new contract? And then sure enough, what happens 6 months down the road? He's persona non grata in Peter Laviolette and David Poile's world. That following summer, the Dallas series, we heard the commentary kind of be like, oh, is this going to be PK Subban's last series in a Predators uniform? And we're like, what? He's like a top 3 player.
Right.
Like, why? What's this? Where's this even coming from? And then what happens a few weeks later? So from that end, when we're sitting there during the Colorado series and they showed David Poile a bunch in that Preds press box, and they're talking about his tenure and it's like, yeah, you wonder, it's like, maybe if the Preds are going to go in a different direction because of everything that had kind of happened, the pattern before, your mind goes to, okay, there might be something to this. And the fact that, you mentioned it earlier, the fact that, the timing on the end of the year press conference was so delayed, it really makes you think that there was, a deeper discussion. I'm not going to speculate as to, Sean Henry came in and was like, no, fight for your job, Dave.
Right.
I think I feel safe in saying there was probably a deeper discussion. And the fact that Sean Henry basically had to come out today with like a letter that said, yeah, we're behind them, like this is an official show of support, kind of makes you think it's like, okay, there is more behind the scenes than, okay, well, what do we need to do with our roster? I think there is a deeper conversation about what everybody wanted to see from each other.
I think it's important too to remember that we don't see, like you said, media sometimes gets some smoke and, then fans, get some smoke and all that kind of stuff, but we don't always get to see behind the curtain. I agree with you. I believe that there were discussions. I don't think they were discussions like you said, like, okay, tell me why we shouldn't get rid of you. But I think the leadership, Sean Henry and the leadership that he represents needed to hear and be reassured about the direction that Poile is headed, the steps that Poile thinks he needs to take. And I feel like he gave that to everybody yesterday in the press conference as well. And I, give credit for that. We don't always see and hear everything. And Poile made a really interesting information and just a great point in the press conference yesterday. He said, you all don't always know what I know. And that's
was that an interesting thing, or is that a dick move?
Oh, no, it's just what is. I mean, it's a fact. We don't
Sure.
know all of the discussions. And I don't think that he meant it, to be an asshat. I really think he's just saying, look, I'm going to make some moves that aren't going to look on the surface like they make a lot of sense, but trust that I have information that this is my best judgment. And he gave the example of Tanner Jeannot. Tanner Jeannot was protected in the expansion draft, and we lost Calle Yarncroke, which people were up at arms about. And who does not love Calle Yarncroke? That was a loss. But what he went on to say is that he knew from talking to connections with the Kraken that their intention was to take Tanner Jeannot. And that's part of, and he knew that Jeannot was going to be an important key moving forward with this team. And that's why he was protected. And I think people were so up at arms about that, but don't always have all the information. And I think it's fair for Poile to say that.
I don't think Tanner Jeannot was the part of that equation people were upset about. I think that goes a little bit further down the roster when you look at Phil Myers.
Phil Myers.
I don't think that was. I don't think protecting Tanner Jeannot, more so in hindsight, but especially at the time, was what people were, I think, really miffed about. And hey, it worked out. Calle Yarncroke is doing well in Calgary, and Tanner Jeannot is probably a top 4 forward for the Preds right now.
But I think that the gist of it, whether, people don't like the moves, like there was a lot of ruckus and rumbling. Why didn't he make a move at the trade deadline? Now, I do want an answer on the Phil Kessel thing, because that just seemed like logic to me. But, Poile said, look, I knew at the deadline, this is not a Stanley Cup contending team. I'm not going to spend the money. And I think people have to understand, as fans, we are emotionally invested, but we are not always super well informed. And I think the Predators fan base, and I love them, like passionate fans, they're amazing, but you can armchair GM till the cows come home, but you don't have all the information.
I'm trying to put this in like a respectful way.
Yeah.
To me, David Poile, there was, I watched the first 48, which I don't know if it is like a crime show.
Oh, I love that show.
And you hear, detectives talk to, either suspects or witnesses that don't want to talk. And a line they use a lot is, he's telling us enough to make it look like he's cooperating, but he's not telling us everything,
Mm-hmm.
So it's like he's making it look like he's cooperating with us, but really he's just, kind of a roadblock. There were certain parts of this press conference that I said, you know what, David Poile is saying all the right things,
Mm-hmm.
and he's making some points. But at the end of the day, does he really have a grasp on what needs to be done to make this team competitive? Now, here's the thing. Full admission, I don't work in an NHL front office. To David Poile's credit, there's a lot of things I don't know. A lot of behind the scenes stuff I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But you kind of have to go on track record. And, David Poile did have some chances to be very aggressive, not just at this trade deadline, but in past years with either picking a side. Are we going to, maybe if we're not, a cup contender, do we need to, not somebody like Filip Forsberg? And he addressed that in press conference. He's saying, look, I'm not trading Filip Forsberg. If we do, our season basically falls apart. So credit to him for that. But there's, in past years, when you've had, the Ryan Ellis situation last year, if your rationale for not making a big move is you're not a playoff team, or you don't think this is a cup team, then why not, be aggressive and pull that trigger earlier? Because, if you're not being aggressive into maybe refreshing your lineup, at a time where the player's value is very, very high, then, you're kind of spinning in circles. And I think the thing with Poile right now is that I think the time has come for him to be bold, for him to kind of make aggressive moves. And he kind of hinted at that a little bit in the press conference. You heard him say, he's like, look, I intentionally did not spend to the cap.
Mm-hmm.
We've been told we can spend to the cap. I just didn't think this year was prudent. And the way he said it kind of made it sound like, you know what? This may be a year in which the budget gets a little bit tighter or expands a little bit up into that cap. You know, we may go out and take a big swing at somebody this offseason, you know, especially with what happens with Filip Forsberg.
Yes, so much hinges on Filip Forsberg signing, and Poile did address that in the press conference too. And we're going to talk about what he said about Filip Forsberg in just a minute, but want to let you know today's episode is brought to you by our partners at BetOnline. BetOnline.net continues to be the #1 source for all your betting needs and sports information. You can find all the latest odds, news, and sports developments, including this year's basketball playoffs, Major League Baseball scores, fights, and even next season's NFL futures. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to their website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts.
So Filip Forsberg came up in the press conference yesterday. Basically, the message from David Poile, I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but it was basically kind of along the same lines of what we have heard pretty much this entire process, which was there's mutual interest in both being back. In fact, the way he kind of said it made it sound like this is the preferred thing for everyone around. It's just going to be kind of a matter of money. And it doesn't, the way Poile said it kind of made it sound like they've still got a lot of work ahead of them right now. But he basically came out and said, he's like, look, up until that point where, you know, it's January 1st and Forsberg is thinking about signing with another team or his options are open, I'm going to keep trying. And it's interesting that he said he's got some other plans out there.
Yes.
B, D, E, you know, in case Forsberg doesn't work out. But he made it very clear that re-signing Filip Forsberg is the Predators' priority right now.
Yes. And he was asked, if Forsberg doesn't sign, does this turn the Predators' next seasons into bigger rebuilds? And his answer was no, which I find interesting. And I don't know how it's not, because losing Filip Forsberg is losing such a huge piece of the core of this team. And to replace not just his production, but his leadership and his skill set, especially, that's a big, like, plan B is not, it's going to suck way more than plan A.
Well,
like, it just is.
Unless plan B is Johnny Gaudreau, then
okay. Maybe. Yeah. Okay. I could sleep okay with that one, but
yeah,
you know, you're going to need that
big plan B if you want to be competitive without Filip Forsberg next year. And, you know, maybe that's a Moneyball situation where it's like, you know, okay, you can't replace Filip Forsberg, but maybe we replace his production by, you know, maybe just spending more in the middle six. You know, like maybe there's not going to be another 40 goal scorer on this team, but maybe there's a couple of, you know, 18, 20, 25 goal scorers out there on the market that can come in and sort of fill that gap. And then all of a sudden the Predators are on even ground again. And then you start to wondering, look, is Philip Tomasino going to be somebody who can kind of maybe jump into, you know, that 30 goals a year kind of guy? Is Luke Evangelista, is he sort of a dynamic forward? Is there going to be somebody in this draft that you can kind of envision being that top scoring winger again? So then all of a sudden, if you kind of plug those gaps and just replace the production as an aggregate, not necessarily as a person, then all of a sudden you're on better footing.
True. And one of the issues that Poile said absolutely has to be addressed is, you know, he talked about second line scoring. You know, he mentioned, of course, Forsberg and Duchesne having great years, and whether Granlund or Joey was on the second line, they were kind of left with not much to work with. And he did mention Cunnin and Tolvanen by name, which I thought, okay, good. At least we're acknowledging the Cunnin situation. We clearly were acknowledging the Tolvanen issue all season long, every time we healthy scratched him. But that is an area where Poile's like, we have got to plug in some talent there. There is a hole in the lineup, and it's like, okay, good. At least, because when they didn't address Cunnin, when they just sort of glossed over the season that he was not having, it was concerning. Like, do you see this? Like, are we all on the same page? And I feel like that was reassuring to hear him say, yeah, no, that second line, we just didn't have anything, and we've got to get that. So I agree with you. I think you could group replace Forsberg, perhaps. I just would really rather not.
I would rather have Johnny Gaudreau. I feel like that would make things a lot easier if Filip Forsberg leaves.
Yeah, no,
I would rather just,
let's just keep it.
Rather have Filip Forsberg.
Yeah, he's a good Swedish boy.
That would certainly make things a lot easier. So we kind of mentioned this earlier. Fan perception has kind of been a thing in Nashville. We all know kind of where Nashville fans stand on David Poile and John Hynes. We kind of hinted that maybe David Poile listens to some of that. There was a question asked in the press conference about what Poile and Hynes think of, sort of the fan apathy, and whether they, sort of feel pressured by that end of things. Let's listen.
Apathy from who? The fans. I hope not. I don't believe that. I hope I'm evaluating things correctly. I feel that going back to last year, and you were sitting in this room, and the questions were hard. And I'm repeating what I said in my comments. There were questions about the coaching, questions about our best players, questions about our identity, and I think we answered almost all of those. I mean, we're in the entertainment business. If I'm a fan of the game, and I will tell you when I don't think our team is playing hard, and I will tell you if I don't think we're entertaining. But this year, Vezina Trophy candidate, the best defenseman in the league, 2 40 goal scorers. We never had anybody score more than 34 goals. A rookie that gets into the conversation for the Rookie of the Year and scores the most goals by a rookie. Mark Borowiecki, he couldn't hardly play last year with all the things that were going on, some physical, a lot mentally, which you talked about, coming back and being, an unbelievable leader on our team, and give it every night, like to the point of like, I'm sitting like, don't do that anymore, because he was just unbelievable how much he brought in the passion to our game.
I can see David Poile just like holding his head and be like, "Oh, Boro,
stop it,
protect yourself." What are your thoughts on that, Ann?
A couple of things. That was, for me, one of the most concerning points of this press conference, because I feel like part of the front office's job is to have a good read on the temperature of the fan situation. And Poile went on to say, look, if we only had 6,000 people in the stands, that would concern me. But, after COVID, our numbers are coming back, and, everybody's sort of rebuilding. But I think you have to broaden your criteria for gauging where the fans are. And, Poile went on later to say that, like, he's not on Twitter. He's like, I'm not on Twitter. I
envy him.
I know. Well played, David Poile. You go. But he said, but the people who are criticizing me on Twitter, it could be, some guy in Alaska, be some 10-year-old boy. And then it's kind of stirs things up. And I understand that. But I think that the front office needs to broaden the input or the way that they gauge the temperature of the fans. Because, and what I think the issue is yes, this team was entertaining this year. And if you say it wasn't, you're lying. This was entertaining. But fans also, they don't want to just be entertained. They want to win. And this team didn't win the Stanley Cup. They didn't do well in the playoffs. And so that's a problem. But also, the key is really consistency. You can get a fan base behind a team that is struggling to rebuild with young players. Like, you can get a fan base behind that and go. You clearly can get a fan base behind a team that's very, very successful. What you struggle to keep a fan base interested is when your team is profoundly inconsistent. And this season, with the drop off they had in that last, 20 games or so, everybody was sort of like, what the hell? And so, consistency is something that I think drives fans to stay plugged in, to stay invested. And Poile has got, somebody in that front office. I don't think people on Twitter are always right. As a matter of fact, I think people on Twitter are more often than not using it as their own personal sports diary, and they're probably not right. But you have to know what people are saying, because then you can head this shit off at the pass. And so it's concerning to me that maybe he and whoever is in leadership just really maybe needs to broaden where they're looking for feedback besides just ticket sales.
I think, to me, at the end of the year, to David Poile's credit, this was one of the most exciting Preds seasons. And really around, Christmas time, January, there were a lot of really hyped Predators fans. I mean, the buzz seemed to be back. The optimism seemed to be back. But at the end of the year, this playoff series, this did not even feel real. I don't know, I'm talking about it from the on-ice perspective. I am talking about it when you went on Twitter. There was, more negativity than anybody. This was like we're getting killed in the first round, even from like long time, optimistic, carry the flag, buy in, all in on this team sort of people were like, this isn't going to be good. And then when, you kind of pay attention to the fans, sort of even after just game 2, even before they came back to Smashville, it was just like, let's just get this over with.
Let's just wrap this shit up.
The energy wasn't there. Bridgestone Arena, those 2 playoff games were dead. It was not
typical Bridgestone Arena hockey. It really wasn't.
No, it was absolutely dead. And that to me is kind of the thing where, not just the fans become apathetic, but it's just, the fans that are in the stands, the energy's not quite there anymore. And maybe it's part of it is just, when I think back to, up until the Stanley Cup run, how everything was kind of a novelty. Around Nashville. It's obviously, their first playoff series way back in 2004 and how electric it was. And then, 2006, 2007, 2012, some of these teams were, oh my God, we might actually be competitive. And then it's, the first playoff win, the first time they're in round 2. And then it's like, the first time you're in the Stanley Cup finals. And then it's just, the novelty sort of wears off, and you're kind of left wondering, okay, well, where else is there to go? Because we're at the point where fans are just kind of bored with getting to the first round of the playoffs and bowing out. Like they need, an exciting team. They need to be back, competing in games 6 and 7 in the second round. They need to be in the conference finals. They need to be getting closer to that Stanley Cup for fans to start to care again. And I think, there's a lot to like about the Preds. I mean, their level of consistency has been absolutely insane since they first made the playoffs. I think that, the stat I saw was only the Pittsburgh Penguins have made more playoffs than the Nashville Predators since 2004.
Right.
And that's wild. Like, it's wild that the Predators have been this consistent for that long. But it seems like, in the past, we've kind of rested on the laurels of, oh, yeah, we got into the first round and scared the team that was going to go on to win the Stanley Cup, or, oh, we made it to the second round and we got very close. That sort of excitement, that level of this is the expectation is completely gone. And that to me is something that I don't quite know if Poile and the ownership in Nashville understand. I think they're not grasping the fact sometimes that we need to go on to the next step as a franchise if you want to keep the interest open.
Do you think fan interest would be different at this point in the offseason had the Predators faced Calgary, had it gone to 6 games, 7 games, and the Predators still lost in the first round? Do you think it would be a different vibe among Twitter Preds had that been the difference? Was it that the Predators were so embarrassed by Colorado? Was it that the Predators just jacked it up so bad that they ended up facing Colorado? Like, what do you think?
I think if the Preds get to like a game 7 against a Calgary, then you're kind of looking at this through a different lens. You're a little bit more optimistic. You're thinking, okay, well, at least like this style can give some really good teams some trouble.
Okay.
You kind of saw that with the Carolina series last year.
Yes, that's true.
The Predators gave the Hurricanes, who were supposed to be the best team in the league, for everything they got.
Yeah.
And I think the expectation was, okay, well, clearly there's holes, but wow, look at what we can do when things are firing on all cylinders. Whereas I think this year is, look, we put up a lot of our best individual seasons and we were still nowhere close. So that to me, I think is it would be a little bit of a different vibe.
True. And people are saying it's the first round exit. We're exiting in the first round. But I do think how the Predators exited the first round and how they ended up playing who they played in the first round really magnified some frustration.
Yeah, let's not leave the Arizona Coyotes debacle out of this, because I cannot even. Yeah, I think that certainly steered some things too. And even to Poile's credit, you kind of heard him say that at the press conference. He's like, we talked about, the way we wound up playing Colorado, the how they got into that matchup, he called that out. So I think there is some realization there that, hey, this isn't just we got embarrassed in the playoffs. This is like a long line of things down the stretch that we definitely need to work on.
Yes. Yeah. And it's good to hear him acknowledge that, because, oh my gosh, I cannot go through another Arizona game like that ever again. So at the end of this, Nick, listening to this press conference, where are you left? How are you left feeling about the Predators this offseason? I'm just curious.
Well, I mean, I think, and I said it earlier, I think they need to pick a side where it's, if you're going a rebuild, then you need to be aggressive in rebuilding. And I don't necessarily mean tank, because I absolutely hate tanking. I hate selling all of your players for, basically, picks and prospects that might work out and just intentionally trying to be bad to get some of these picks. I would like it more in a way of, look, if you're not going to use Mikael Granlund for the next 2 years, or if he's going to be stuck on a losing team, what can you get from him that might help you 2 years down the road? That sort of thing. But, if David Poile has no plans of a rebuild, if he is thinking that, we still believe in this core, and if Forsberg's back, then we're going to be all in, then you need to be all in. And you need to be aggressive in addressing some of this team's shortcomings. And that is something David Poile did not do this season. Really didn't do it last offseason either. So I do think if there is a time, if your intention is to not rebuild and kind of keep this core going and try to get closer to a cup, then you're going to need some drastic moves this offseason, and not just forward thinking moves, but moves that make your team better right now for the next 2-3 years.
Yeah. I would agree with that. I think Poile has to, I think he has to prove to a lot of the fans that he is willing to do what it takes to continue to move this team forward, because I don't think you can argue this team moved forward this season. This team got better this season. Not where they want to be, but they got better. But Poile is going to have to make some hard decisions and take some action to keep that trajectory going for sure.
Yeah, so interesting topics coming up. We'll, of course, have plenty of that next week. More good shows planned.
More good stuff.
More good stuff. A lot of interesting discussion to have. And hey, there's 2 days between now and the next show. And the way hockey Twitter moves,
oh my gosh,
who knows what nonsense can come up in the next 2 days. So we might have another zesty show on Monday. So yeah, stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, where can the people find your work online?
You can find my work at ontheforecheck.com, and you can find me on Twitter at AnnK_Mama on Ice.
I'm Nick Morgan. You can find me at ontheforecheck.com. If you're on Twitter, be sure to follow the show at LO_Predators. If you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to like the video, subscribe, and leave a comment. Let us know what you thought of David Poile and John Hynes coming back for another run. That's going to do it for us today on the Locked On Predators podcast. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We will be back next week with new shows. See you then.